Can you hear me? Yes. All right. So I'm Havoc Pennington. I've been hacking on GNOME or being a manager for people hacking on GNOME or whatever for a long time. But you know, these days there's all kinds of people here that I don't even know and all kinds of projects that I don't even know about. So what we wanted to do is get up and just kind of humbly suggest one of the opportunities that we think GNOME might have over, I don't know, the next 6 months, the next year, maybe a little bit longer. Joan, I edited my slides while Donna was talking to include his quote here, that it would really help for us to have an opportunity that we were focused on as a group. As I go to all the different talks here and look at all the different things that people are doing, there's all these sub-projects, and they're all really cool, but a lot of them aren't even making it into the default desktop, and they're not coming together into a coherent user experience so you can say, this is going to be the product, these are the users that we're going to give it to, and here's why that might achieve what Mark Andreessen calls product market fit. And it's a cool blog if you never read it, where suddenly we have something that's cool, that people can't get elsewhere, that finds a target audience that really loves it, that starts to evangelize it, and that starts to take off and grow the user base. You might remember Jeff talking about the 10 by 10 vision a couple of years ago. So, we have one concrete proposal that we want to throw out for what might be an opportunity that we have right now. It's not the same as opportunities we've had in the past. It won't be the same as opportunities you might have in 2 years, but it's something that we might have now. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about, what it is, why it's interesting, why it's a good opportunity, some of the technical directions that we've started to go down towards it. But they're by no means everything. In fact, they're just a small part of it. And in many ways, the reason that I wanted to come here is that one company isn't going to be able to do this. So this is kind of the summary of it. We're calling it the online desktop. Maybe the name sucks. It has the virtue that if you do GNOME online desktop, it has a cool acronym. But it's just creating the perfect window to the internet. Increasing, and let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Well, actually, let's jump ahead. This is where the industry is going. And you saw, I've actually seen multiple talks here, seen multiple talks at this GWADEC that said precisely this, that you see everybody moving more and more to web applications. And that's starting to undermine kind of the traditional desktop, both Microsoft Windows, but also GNOME, at least as we conceived of it 5 years ago, and as the code sort of, for historical reasons, still reflects. And so the interesting thing about this, and Jono mentioned offhand this morning that there's still a lot of advantages to rich applications over web apps, but I think if you don't think about, the wrong way to think about web applications is that you're changing your toolkit, that you're switching from GTK or whatever there's on Windows to HTML and JavaScript, right? That's not the point. That's not why people are suddenly starting to use web applications. They're starting to use web applications because web applications are a different thing. They let people do different things. They change the nature of computing. And what people are doing on computers. And I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of those ways, but for example, you don't have to download and install software. You don't have to do backups. You don't have to do security updates. These are kind of the maintenance conveniences. But also, suddenly, the web application actually knows about things like all your friends. It can incorporate all of that. It can have collaboration features where you can send stuff to other people. One of the huge advantages turns out to be the small thing, that you don't have to maintain your own local address book, that actually your friends add all their own stuff on social networking sites like Facebook. And just to kind of go into a personal anecdote, I've started trying to replace I've started trying to use Google Docs and spreadsheets, which is a relatively young web application, over the last 6 months. And it's totally changed my daily life, basically. Suddenly I can do all these things with a word processor document that I never could have done before, and I essentially never used a word processor before, but I do use Google Documents. And the reason is, well, first of all, I would never do a word processor document because I would assume that it would get lost at some point among my many computers. I wouldn't have it, say I wanted to take a note about a particular topic. I didn't have that document on my computer at work, or I didn't have that document on my computer at home. But with Google Docs, for example, I'll have a set of notes about things that my wife and I are trying to get done over the next month. I share it with her. She can also access it wherever either of us are. We can update that list. We can have a shared calendar together, or with coworkers. So we actually work together on some internal Red Hat project, right? And we're trying to figure out what should we say or what should the public statement be, and we can just all immediately access that same document incredibly easily. And so suddenly I'm using a word processor when I wasn't using one before, and I'm doing things that I wasn't able to do before. And I think that's the essence of why things are moving online and why we can't think of it as, well, it's just JavaScript and HTML versus GTK or something like that. And you also have to remember that although the web apps may be less rich now, that's been steadily and rapidly changing over the last few years. So there's a lot of parallels here with Jono's talk, and he also talked about our proprietary competitors. So this is a quote from Bill Gates. This is what they're doing after Vista. And essentially what they're doing is trying to do everything that I was just talking about, incorporate it into Windows. Keep all your data online, have it all where you can share it with your friends, and so forth and so on. But here's the key point, and I think this is why we have a great opportunity. They're totally screwing it up. Like with Vista, when you looked at Vista, I don't know, when you compared what we were trying to do with GNOME at the time that they were working on Vista and what Vista ended up doing, they were pretty similar things, right? We were all adding, better gadgets and screwing with metadata and search in the file system and 3D graphics and that sort of thing. But if you look at what we could do with the online desktop versus what Microsoft is in fact doing in this area, it could be really different what we do, and what we do could be fundamentally better. What they're doing is offering Windows Live Services competitors for all the applications that people already use. So Windows Search, Microsoft, IM, whatever it may be, every service, their own online office suite. But people don't want to switch all their services. That's ridiculous. And they want to have the choice to use exciting new services that come out from the latest startup, whatever it might be. An exciting area right now, people are starting to try to do something that might be the web-based equivalent of Quicken, for example. There's a couple startups, so Wasabi, Mint. And Microsoft won't have an alternative to that for quite a while. MSN Money is still a local application. And those startups aren't just copying Quicken. Instead, for example, in Quicken you have to tediously tag the category that all your spending items are in. They do that using the community knowledge base, so it can automatically, if you shop at Safeway and that looks a certain way on your credit card statement, if anybody else has ever tagged that as groceries, then it just works. So I want to be able to use that, and with the GNOME Online Desktop, we can immediately integrate with all that stuff as it comes out, and we can give people a choice. So if Google is better, or if Flickr is better, or whatever it is, there's a long list, people can use that thing. And that would make what we're able to offer in Linux and GNOME fundamentally better than what Microsoft is planning to do, at least as far as their public statements. Okay, fair enough. So we wanted to try to give a little bit of a demo of what we have at this point. I want to go into more detail. We're having a variety of issues with the network setup and projector setup, so we'll see how it goes. Got it together?
Yeah, I'm going to try this. So, I don't know. The demo guys aren't with us today. So let's see. I'm going to be looking back. All right. So you can see up here, I'm going to try and use the mouse maybe to point at things. This is what we've been working on a little bit. It's an application called BigBoard that I think we blogged about a little bit. And it's got a couple different areas that I want to talk about real quick. And these are ideas that we've been pulling out of things like OLPC, because back when Seth and I got to do some original designs on OLPC, we really got to figure out what a computer could be like if we started fresh. And so some of those things are being pulled into here. So you can see at this top left area here, this is me. This is my little avatar and my name. And the reason we present that right up there is because we want to give the person a sense of identity for the session they're using. Right? Like in the GNOME About Me dialog, nobody ever changes the picture and the name there unless they hunt for that GNOME About dialog, find out where you can change it, and edit it in that section. But what we really want is for people to create an identity such that you can find them on the network, and we can use that identity inside AIM programs as like a default avatar and things like that. So automatically I have my name presented. When you first log in and you don't have anything done, you know, you have like an empty image and a unknown name kind of thing. So it kind of has an incentive for you to change it because it's staring at you saying like, I don't know who you are. And then we have a couple different sections here where we have the local people around me. Right now it's not showing any local people because there's no one else connected. I'm on like a little bit separate network so we could make sure we were the online desktop. And then, you know, we have some other things like log into my account. So I'm going to quick try and log into Google, and we'll see if this will all work. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to a new instance of a desktop where we have some hacks on GDM basically to create an automatic user. Oh, yeah, sweet. It is time for the demo. All right, so one of the cool things here about creating this little identity as well is that instead of having the like, is it a computer, do we call it the desktop, we have a central place for people to say like, I click on this in order to get things about this session or things about this instance, right? So I'm taking this to create a little slide out where I can then say, okay, now I'm gonna, this is where things could really break. Log in as another user. And so we'll see if this comes up with anything special, and I'll let you know if it's hopping up on my screen. All right, so now you can see this here. What I'm going to do is try and log in as Havoc Pennington. So,
And this is actually creating an account, a Unix account on the fly.
Yeah.
So we're logging into an empty account.
And the black is for dramatic pause. So. All right, so right now we have a new system running up, right? It's a blank account. It was just created on the fly. And now I'm going to switch to God mode.
Note
right.
that in in a real product it would default to that. Yeah.
So, all right, well, obviously the projector is going to screw up a little bit here. But what I'm going to do is try and log in this new account. And, is that going? Yeah. All right, so we're going to log in as Havoc because right now this account has no settings. It doesn't know who I am, things like that. So we're going to try and make sure it knows that. All right. Sweet, it's working. All right, so now I've logged in as Havoc for his account, and you'll see just in a second the Mugshot's going to react. And you can see on the left there, the big board is starting to fill in with all the things it knows about Havoc, right? It's pulled down his name, and it's found local people. It's kind of hard to see here, but in my view, I can see myself there, and now it's filling in all my stuff. And that is my local account right there, running on the same session on this computer. So you can see.
It actually found him on the local system using Avahi. And if he had been on a different computer, like we're treating two sessions on the same computer with Avahi the same way, just technical implementation note, as two sessions on two different computers. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what I'm waiting for right now is for the. What's that? Yeah, I can't get it to slide over. And I don't see the browse files.
Problem.
Yeah. So, all right. What I can do here is also log into Havoc's Gmail account, and we'll see if it'll then pull down all of Havoc's things to do. You can see on the left-hand side here, of course, it's a little bit cut off. We have Havoc's Google Calendar. It's pulling in all the events for today. We can kind of scroll through here to the different events and things like that, which it doesn't really have any. But if I click on, let's say, a cool talk at 1 p.m., we get lots of alerts from Firefox. And then
and note how this would be improved if we actually shared the keyring with Firefox and even had your keyring in an encrypted form stored on the server, and then we could nuke some of these logins.
All right. I'm going to go back. Because obviously I can't get to the... You want to do? I'll just switch back to me.
Yep.
All right.
Whee.
So now I'm back to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now you can
So-
see a little bit of the side here.
And that works across the whole LAN, not just on one system. Yep.
And so there's a couple different things we have. Let me talk in here. There's one more thing that we can kind of show here is the applications browse that we've done. And what we tried to do is integrate both the application install and the application search because it's basically about this. You're doing about the same thing, right? So let's say you don't have fspot installed on this machine, and I go to search for photo, right? Right, I have fspot installed, so it finds it. But then what we're working on is to have different photo apps display in the bottom here. So if I click on more popular photo apps, it's going to open up a web browser that'll show me the Mugshot application listing for different applications so that I can browse which ones are popular. We're trying to gather statistical information on what applications are popular in order to provide the kind of best of breed thing that's going on. So instead of offering people the gazillions of applications that GNOME file has, or based on votes, which are kind of arbitrary, we apparently not showing up. We use popularity ranking on how people use it and how often they use the application, such that fspot sits at the top, way above some other random GQ photo view application that we wouldn't want people to install. And that's, I'm waiting for nothing.
Could be. Never predicted, Emma. Describe things after they happen.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to mention here is that we're kind of using the Mugshot web template, mostly because we didn't feel like doing a different web template. But what we're proposing to do going forward is kind of take the Mugshot server and split out part of it that's just kind of a, this watch what all my friends are doing online sort of social service, and put that on a par with Facebook and Flickr and Picasa and all that stuff. If you see those little squares up there under Brian's name on top of the panel, those are all the just big giant lists, an arbitrary number of web services. So we're going to put Mugshot in that category. And then have a much more headless, community branded, totally open source, community run server that's the actual required part of the online desktop. At least that's what we're thinking about right now. I think it makes sense. So it's kind of confusing that there's sort of Mugshot branding laying around in a few places, but that's not the point or the idea. Yeah, I'm going to talk more. So the question is, do we have an idea that GNOME.org would host it? And I think that's actually one of the huge, that is almost the big question that we have to figure out, is the thing that we have to do is, or that I think we should do, is have a desktop that by default, if I get the live CD, from Fedora or Ubuntu or wherever, and I put it in and it just works, and there's some server that it connects to, and I don't have to be an IT department and set up my own server or something of that nature, right? Basically, we need GNOME as a project, as a community project, to be able to rely on a server side. And so because unlike software, a server side actually involves people, admins doing work, and hardware and bandwidth that costs money, it's a little bit tricky to figure out how to do that. I don't have all the answers, but I think it might involve the GNOME Foundation doing something, maybe a subsidiary of the GNOME Foundation doing something. I don't know exactly. Right. Right, okay. The question is, would it be possible to run your own alternative service? And absolutely, because it would all be open source. Even right now it's slightly challenging because you'd have to strip the Mugshot branding, but once we kill that, then it should be trivial. I mean, as long as you're comfortable setting up a server and so on.
So
Yeah.
without actually patching the software and telling people how to get stuff from this repository over here,
Yep.
you'd be able to use the official software builds for the
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I could give a whole nother talk about, basically this topic, like how we would host this stuff. I think we might need, and like Tim O'Reilly has talked about this, we might need an open service definition that defines, what makes a hosted instance of something, what makes that open, and you can see that Wikipedia has like pioneered some of that, they have sort of open governance, sort of outdated but existing like way to just suck down all the data in Wikipedia. And there's a whole set of concerns. Once you have software that's not ever distributed, then the open source definition doesn't really tell you anything, and except that you can host your own instance. But in any case, it's tricky. What else do you want to go through here?
Show changing your name.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is just a quick little demo to show that everything that's going on the web, the online desktop, like data model here, also reflects whatever happens on the client. So here, my name, I can change it to have my full name and save it here. And you can see up at the top left there, the big board model instantly changed in order to reflect that as well. And I can change my picture to use one of these cool stock icons. I like the scary guy, actually.
Yeah.
So then the scary guy shows up here as my new avatar. And so it's this whole reactive online desktop system.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and talk about this in a little more detail. So basically, Owen designed this system. And we take, if you're familiar with an object relational mapping like Hibernate, so Owen extended that to have what we're calling the online desktop data model, which gives us a way to have an object relational mapping and then actually keep a bunch of XMPP clients in sync as to the state of those objects. So, as you change something in the database, it spreads out to any clients that might be interested in it. And kind of another technical note that I guess hasn't been pointed out is that this desktop is linked to the server via XMPP. Okay, so actually that's what I wanted to talk about next was some of the implementation stuff. I don't want to dive too much into how all this works because there's like 4 or 5 separate talks, and we're actually doing we have at least one BOF in mind already to talk about the representation of people and how you do the get people call in the GNOME desktop. But what do we have to do to implement this so that I can go up to any computer and immediately have all my state? Like that's a pretty technically challenging thing, right? Think about everything in your home directory. Think about all those dot files. They all need to die, or at least just be caches. So that's kind of an interesting thing to start thinking about. It's obviously going to be pretty hard to get all of them, but if we get a few low-hanging fruit, it's immediately really useful. Then on top of that, we want to integrate the best web applications with the desktop. I think a lot of people in the industry that sort of don't work on desktops have the idea that everything's just going to move to the web, so the desktop's irrelevant. So that's kind of ridiculous because something has to run your web browser, right? Like, you ultimately have to have hardware drivers. You have to have your web browser. And right now, you have your web browser running in this desktop with all sorts of, I don't know, in many ways irrelevant stuff. Like, when I switched to Google Documents, I suddenly found that the recent documents menu in GNOME, for example, had nothing to do with anything that I was doing. Or if you look at we showed the calendar and mail notifications from Google, that can't effectively be done from a web-only application. So there's always going to be a desktop, and what we're saying is that desktop could be optimized to work with these services. And this gives us an opportunity. You can suddenly, like I talked about how all these web-based apps, they're not just using a different toolkit, they're actually able to do new things, and we can suddenly do all those new things in the desktop shell as well. And this should all be the default, at least in some mode, or I should be able to burn a live CD that has it all as the default. Or if I'm a new user, I log in, I'm not going to just start creating all this crap that I have to maintain, update, and back up. It's just going to work. It's just going to put it all online. It's just going to work with the web services that I already use. Okay, next slide. So I pretty much already talked about this. Let's keep going. I just wanted to briefly cover a few of the technical challenges that we have to do, and some of them are seemingly easy. The major thing here is that there's no HTTP library that's easy to use with glib. that uses your proxy, cookies, etc., from your browser. It's just not there. Doesn't seem that hard, except for the fact that you have to hack on Firefox. But it's not there. So if I want to just get a password-protected file from any web service or any website I might be using from something other than the browser, I can't do it. So simple things like that, you just need to fix it. We could also support the common XML APIs, things like GData. Every website has an API these days. This is what I talked about earlier that Owen designed, this desktop data model. I actually have a diagram of that. So what's going on? We have a server. Ultimately, that's just a database. It's connected via XMPP to a service running in your desktop session. So that's just a little daemon in the session. And it is getting the state that your desktop session is interested in from the server and staying synchronized live. And it just instantly, if you change something on the server, it changes on the client. Then, we have Big Board as the panel application that we were showing there. The Mugshot tray icon is that little Mugshot application that gives you the little notifications. So, ultimately, that's what Mugshot will be, is just that thing, not any of the rest of this. And any other application that's interested. And the way the data model works is that it's extensible. It's kind of extensible in the XML sense, that things are identified by URLs. They're all namespaced. It's the code. If you wanted to add a new data type, you basically have to add the database table. Then you have to add the support for it in your app. You don't have to extend all that stuff in the middle. Like, you don't have to write any protocol, either DBus or XMPP, and you don't have to extend that engine. You just add the database table and then make your app use it. Because there's a generic protocol that can deal with any kind of data type. So this is the problem of how do we have a server component. And the reason that this comes up is that the existing web services just don't have everything we want. So for example, say we want to store the name of your Flickr account, name of your Google account, all those things that it just knew when we logged in. There isn't like some existing web service that happens to do that. So while we can use Flickr for photos, use Google for documents, whatever it might be, we can't just store your desktop background setting, for example, in the pre-existing desktopbackground.org. Now, at the current rate of Web 2.0, maybe that'll exist tomorrow, but it doesn't now. And so that's why we're talking about having a server component that's open source, that's controlled by the open source community. And if we suddenly want to sync more information between all of your desktops, if we want to extend the server side to make the online desktop more powerful, then we can do it. And there's a host of complexities there, but I think it's something that we can actually figure out. Okay, so coming up out of the technology a little bit, just for a couple more minutes, I want to talk about how the online desktop would appear to an end user, right? So I think lots of times GNOME isn't really shipping a finished product. Like, we ship a bunch of tarballs, right? And you could download that, but that's not something, I can't tell anybody I know that's non-technical to go get the GNOME tarballs, right? I might be able to tell them to go get the Nokia 800. I might be able to tell them to go download this Ubuntu Live CD, get Fedora. I might be able to tell them to get Red Hat Enterprise Linux. But what GNOME itself is shipping isn't a product. So I want to talk about a few of the kind of product or user experience, like how would an end user think about the online desktop. So one way is improving the GNOME mobile experience. Wouldn't it be, I think it would be a lot neater if when I got my Nokia N800, I could just log in to the GNOME online service and have it immediately know what are my IAM accounts, who are my friends, get my music, all that stuff. It should just work. There's no configuration on that device. That would be a pretty nice and pretty sweet improvement. And I think there's also a lot of things that you could just do on the N800. Like, say we had that HTTP library and APIs, so you could easily integrate with any online service. You could suddenly have a lot of neat features on your Memo and make them a lot simpler to implement. Another way this might pop up is a simple appliance-style product. So this is as many people have pointed out, many of these have failed over the years. But I think that there's actually been, if you study some of those failures closely, there's been a lot of evidence that people wanted the thing, and that there were various execution problems. Either people made a bad version of it, or they sold it for far below cost and went out of business. But, you know, actually my grandfather had one of the .com era versions of this, and it was perfect for him. It was just a monitor, a keyboard, a really low power computer. It didn't have any state. It maintained itself, and it worked with, you know, the simple online services that he wanted to use. He could email the grandkids and, you know, shop online or something of that nature. Slightly more flexible or less simplified thing that might not be quite as much of an appliance would just be a really great PC for, you know, high school and college kids. You know, imagine if we do something that's sleek, it's hip, it's cheap in the manner of the one laptop per child, very low powered, it doesn't take a lot of CPU to use all these web apps, but it's perfect for Facebook, for IM, listen to music, it does all that stuff, it just works. That's just something that we could sell. In more of a business or corporate setting, Google Apps for your domain. So if you go on online-desktop.org, I put up another quote that's not in the slides, but what Google is doing is essentially selling, most of you probably know this, their whole suite of apps, you know, mail, calendar, docs and spreadsheets, the works, and you can put it on your company's domain and just buy it for all your employees and use that as your intranet or your company infrastructure. And that's really appealing, right? If you have 5 people in your company or 10 people in your company, you don't want to be maintaining an IMAP server and God knows what. So what we could do is offer a perfect client for that. Possibly, you know, basically say, you're outsourcing and making zero maintenance, all your server-side services, we do the same thing with the client. So those are just some ideas about how this might be taken, put in product form, and then delivered to end users. And, you know, ultimately, you know, what does this mean for us? How is it different? And what it means is that it makes us a lot more relevant to the industry. It gives us an opportunity to go out there and generate more excitement, to get more users, to say, this is what we're about, these are the benefits that we're going to bring to you. Because it's not enough to just say, well, it's a desktop. And to this day, I'm really frustrated that on GNOME.org, that's basically what it says. Because that's not a direction. It's not like an end-user story. The end-user stories right now are things like one laptop, things like the Nokia N800, that sort of thing, in product form, you know, even the Linux distributions. So that's what it does for us. Suddenly gives us a focus. It gives us a direction. And kind of interesting about how we've approached it is that we approached it in an evolutionary way, not in a, you know, let's reinvent the whole desktop, let's rewrite everything, let's create a new UI toolkit. Like, we haven't, at least so far, in our prototype so far that we showed you, we haven't done that. This is actually not that hard to get to from the current GNOME code base. You know, if you look at, like, say, storing settings online, I did that in, I don't know, it's like 100 lines of Python that just hooks up gconf to online storage. And really, the only thing that's complicated about that is making sure that some kind of online storage is always available. So this is something that we could do that would suddenly make our desktop dramatically different, you know, from Vista, which doesn't connect to online services at all, but also from the next generation of Microsoft Windows, where they're doing this incorrectly, in my opinion, by hooking it all to Microsoft's proprietary services. So, well, stay back there a second. So, you know, what can you guys individually do to make this happen? And I think that, you know, the most obvious thing is just sit down, look at your app, and how can it be more relevant, you know, in a world where people are preferring web apps, where there's strong advantages to web apps, and where there's just really no reason for somebody to maintain all their local state, their local computer, their local software installation. People don't want to do that. And so one thing we need to do is get back to thinking of GNOME as a whole product. And that means JH building, or however, I don't know, daily RPM or Deb snapshots, somehow taking the whole thing that we're going to ship as GNOME 2 point whatever and run it on your desktop. You know, dog food that thing. If you're interested in what we're doing, then dog food big board. If you're interested in, you know, using Gimme or AWN or whatever to accomplish the same goals, then dog food those. But be trying the whole GNOME desktop and fit your project into it. Like, you know, if you're working on a project, is that in the default desktop install? How does it show up by default? How do people find it? How are they going to use it? There's infrastructure problems here, right? Like the HTTP library I've talked about. Those need solving. Need people to look into it. And look at your app. How much stuff are you just storing locally that's going to get lost as soon as my hard drive crashes, or that I'm not going to have when I go to my computer at work? And just commit to fix it, right? And it's going to be hard to fix it, especially for the first 2 people, because there's not going to be a server available for them to use. But we've shown how we can start to overcome that. So I'll wrap up now. I know you all just want to go to the party, have beer. I just want you to imagine the huge difference between just continuing to do a desktop and leading the next round of desktop innovation. Imagine the scenario where Microsoft is sort of showing that this is a good idea, which is basically what's going on. Everybody is saying, this is what we want. This is, just better computing. But Microsoft does it wrong, and we do it correctly, where it actually works with all the services that people want to use. And also imagine if somebody else takes this away from us. Like, I think one thing people keep talking about, and I don't have any evidence that this is actually happening, but people are always saying, wouldn't it be cool if there was a Google desktop that was based on Linux, right? And I think a lot of you might suddenly say, oh, that's really cool. But what I would ask is, if that would be cool, why aren't we doing it? Like, why should that be, Google's proprietary code and not something that the GNOME project, as a community got together and just did? Make it work with Google services, make it work with every other service. And there's no reason that we can't just do it. It's not like we need permission from somebody. So, just think about the difference between, GNOME, it's a desktop, people make it into finished products like the N800, and GNOME, we're leading the next generation of desktop innovation. And I think ultimately that's why, I think that this is something we should seriously consider. And I hope that, we can have more conversations throughout the conference about, how we would do it, what all the practicalities are, how different projects might fit in, et cetera.
This is where I get to wrap up on experience talks. All right, so
Yeah.
since all I do is talk about experiences, part of this, right, what we're talking about is just imagine the moment when you get your N770 for the first time, or your N800, and it's a mobile device, and what's the first thing you do with it? You start entering in your email account, and you start trying to get set up Gmail, and you start trying to get set up on your podcasts, and all the things that you had on your desktop that were working, but now you have to then try and transfer all this stuff over to your N800 because it's a mobile device, and for some reason nobody thought to just store that information somewhere online such that you could kind of pull it down into this device. That's basically what the online desktop is trying to do. The other instance is when you start using a fresh desktop, and you've just installed, or you're on a live CD, and you go to use Firefox, and it doesn't have the 50 Firefox extensions you normally use, right? How do you go get those? You start searching the web, you go back onto Mozilla extensions, and you try and find all the plugins you use, and you download them, but if we can save these things at the online desktop database, what you can do is just be presented with a dialog that says, do you want all your Firefox extensions back? And we can start downloading them and putting them right back in. It's going to save time on all these situations where you're getting a new device and you're trying to get started. We can have all those accounts ready for you. You don't have to start plugging them in individually, especially on these small mobile devices where input is a pain in the ass. I mean, you don't want to have to spend time entering accounts and passwords.
It's not just on first login, right? In a world of cell phones and internet tablets and what have you, everybody has multiple computers. So if I bookmark the restaurant I'm going to at home, and then I'm out there trying to find it, then it should already be on my mobile phone, right? I mean, it's a continuous synchronization thing. If I had a friend at home, then they should also be on my phone. I mean, this stuff should just stay in sync. So.
Yeah. And we can wait for one single company to do this, like Google or Yahoo, and have it all be in that one silo, right? But then you have to live in that one world and know that, I use Flickr for photos because I think Flickr has the best photo system going on right now. And maybe Picasa stuff is kind of catching up, but really I'm probably going to stick with it for a little while. And so I'm always going to have this disconnected account silo going on online, and Google probably isn't going to solve the situation where I use Flickr for photos and Google for a lot of other things, right? Because it's not going to be in their best interest, but it's in our best interest. We have to provide that glue.
It's like a unique advantage that only open source is going to have the NADs to just work with everything. So we should leave some time for questions. So I think we'll wrap it up. It's like 1,000 of them.
I was just wondering if are you basically saying that we should not use Abbey Word, we should use Google Docs, and we should not use Fspot, we should use Flickr? Because if you want to say, let's turn GNOME into something that connects to what people use, well, you said proprietary competition was Windows.
Yeah.
But I would say that also the proprietary competition is Flickr and Google Docs and spreadsheets and YouTube and things like that. And if you want to make GNOME into a way of connecting to what people are wanting to use, then you could just turn it into like a remote desktop view for Windows, because that's what most people use.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, so this is, I think this is, while this initially appears compelling, I think it's wrong for the same reason that it was wrong to say 15 or 20 years ago that GNU should not run on Solaris. So what we have to realize is that if we just stick to that, then basically open source just becomes completely irrelevant, along with the historical Windows stuff. So what we need to do instead of that is make open source relevant in the new world. Initially, it's going to involve using a lot of these services. And you guys say they're proprietary, but I bet there's not a lot of you in here that don't use any of them. And if you're not going to say, well, we're not ever going to use it on ideological grounds, then you can't on ideological grounds not work on that stuff. And so what we have to do, eventually maybe we make an open source alternative to Flickr. And also I would say, I don't think that dropping things like fspot or AbiWord is necessarily right, because there's actually, both of those are projects that have been doing exciting stuff in terms of taking advantage of the internet for like AbiWord collaboration and fspot integration with things like Flickr.
Because I think that's a better way of doing it, getting the applications to use online rather than put everything online.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
I do actually use
don't get me
Mugshot,
wrong, we're not talking about throwing everything away.
Yeah.
It is very much about, as you saw here, there's local stuff, it integrates with online. But I would just say that, ultimately the thing has to be exciting, it has to work, and you can't re-implement everything at once. You have to, continuously try to stay relevant, to do things that people actually want to do. And make it work. So I don't know.
I just wanted to quickly also say something that's always been on my mind. Open source server software runs most of the software, server software in the world. Why can't we just replace a bunch of these things? Why can't we have an online drive where your AbiWord stuff is saved to, that's running on the GNOME server? To say that we can't use the Google stuff and the proprietary stuff is all just examples of what can be done that's already out there that has APIs, but for some reason the open source community has not been hooking up our servers and our clients in interesting ways, and we've left that to the proprietary companies. So what we need to do is actually make it interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about it. If we can get our first open source server that we can rely on, then we start to extend that. And the other thing that we're doing here, compared to what Microsoft might do, or an entirely hypothetical, I don't think is even that likely, Google Desktop, those are going to work with Microsoft services or with Google services. What we might build would work with anything, total user choice, and if there were an open source alternative, we could make that the default. So, by leading here and getting users on the client, then we have a toehold, we can actually make a difference. Whereas if we just sort of shrug and say, well, all services and servers are proprietary, and so we can never play in that world, and we can never have the advantages that people are looking for in modern computing, then, we just lose, right?
Well, I mean, I do use Mugshot as a social networking site, but I don't use Facebook or MySpace and things because of that reason, because I can, if I've got an idea, and I can just say, go on the wiki and add it and things. Yeah. But I don't think that making it, a required thing is a particularly good idea.
Oh, no, okay, so just to be clear, what I would advocate is that the required part is sort of the server that say, the GNOME Foundation controls, that, stores your desktop background or what have you, and then it's, like I said, it works with your choice.
Well, for me, it's basically about control and privacy, because I know that with my applications I can control them, and I've got them private. And then for social networking, you don't want it to be private. That's the point. So that's why that's online. But I don't think I wouldn't feel comfortable with everything being online. Yeah.
Hi. So there's isn't there a synchronization problem here? Because we're dealing, if looking at the mobile case, there's a lot of times when you're not online and you're creating information, So you've got synchronization in the future there. It's also with data sets, which, large data sets when you want a local, you're actually editing on a local system and then later on, lazily pushing that up to the server. So that strikes me as something that's needed for this to work well for people and is a difficult problem. Yeah,
well, synchronization, I think, is simpler if you deal with it on the sort of item-by-item case. Something like a huge scientific data set, you just never store it online. I mean, screw it. It's not like we're going to break having local applications. There's just a variety of different methods. Like for some kinds of data, you can just merge it all. For some kinds of data, you can just disable being able to change it, like just gray the thing out when you're offline. I mean, there's lots of different ways to handle it.
So an application-by-application basis. So to say,
well, I think
when it's editing large photos. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple of concerns with this approach. I had my presentation to give this afternoon. Let's say I put my presentation file up on the web, and now I can get at it anywhere except when I can't get on the network, like I couldn't this afternoon. And what happens then? My other concern, my other concern is security. Believe me, I ain't putting any of my work documents up on Google Docs. Okay? So where does that leave us?
So as far as not being able to get to things, a simple solution for the presentation thing is just for the, I'm sure Google presentations will eventually use Google Gears and just keep a local copy of it. I also think that's going to become less and less of a concern. For me personally, my computer's a brick. If I can't get online, here I've just been, I'll turn it on, see if I can get network. If not, I turn it off. Not everybody's to that point, but I certainly am. And there are a lot of computer users today that are already to that point. So I think that'll fade in importance over time. It can also be addressed technologically. As far as security, there's a real issue there. It has to be done carefully. Some people are never going to be comfortable with it, but to talk about the proverbial kids today, they already just dump all of their personal information online or pretty close to it. And if you look at a 5-person business, I bet using Google Apps for your domain is a hell of a lot more secure than their unpatched Windows clients and Netlink appliance that is also unpatched. So I don't know. It's kind of a relative thing. It depends on who you are. But
so given that I know that Google strolls through my email on a regular basis, what makes me believe that keeping my documents in Google Docs is more secure than anything?
Well, I'm not going to defend Google, right? There's lots of different companies.
I'm relying on somebody's goodwill and benevolence, which I don't have any particular demonstration of. To I promise I won't look at your stuff.
Well,
I know
it's a personal thing, right? Some people might only use a service that encrypts everything, and only I have the private key. And I'm trying to remember, there is some service that actually works that way. Some people will never be comfortable with any of this at all. I think it's a very small minority. Personally, I already put all kinds of private stuff on Google, and I'm comfortable with it. So, I think it's just kind of a personal thing.
So I think it's a very interesting concept, but what we have to have is a completely software-based virtualized server appliance, which makes it possible to run you can call it a GNOME server or something like that, which runs on any ISP, and of course it has to be virtualized, and then you can use the existing technologies we have. We have encryption stuff, or look of the Java stuff. If you plug in the OTR plugin, you can be sure that perhaps NSA can crack it, but probably not all secret services. And so if I trust him because I like him, he brought a good device to my pocket, and then he has his server appliance virtualized running in probably Finland, I don't know. I'm running mine in Germany, and then I define a level of trust between our two devices on the server side. So, and he can store his bookmarks on I can look at it. So we don't need Google, we don't just need very cheap ISPs. And if you go, I can only speak for German. A virtual server in Germany costs you roughly 10 euros a month, and that I can afford. I can install Linux on it, virtualized, send stuff, or we will see what virtualization brings. So, and I would trust this device and not the device of my administrator. Because if I'm a CEO of a huge company and I have a project like that, and I would like to change something in my company, don't ask the frogs if you would cut down a swamp. So if your administrator is interested in your project, he's looking on your local device. And if the device is anywhere in the internet, completely encrypted, that's possible, of course. We have GNOME Virtual File System. The guy, where's he? Mr. Larson, I don't know. He's rewriting the GNOME Virtual File System. Put in all this technology in the next version of GNOME Virtual File System and you will be successful.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have 2 comments. One about the security. If you or me would put our work documents on Google Apps, then we are fired. Am I right? And
no, I already did it. Not fired yet. We'll see about tomorrow.
And the second on your question, why we as open source community didn't make wonderful servers with all this stuff and we are relying on Yahoo, Google, whoever, there's a very simple answer. Because it's awfully expensive to keep the huge servers, bandwidth, all the stuff. And so I think if there is any hope for this to be viable, then it has to be a gentleman from Nokia who at the presentation this afternoon, or keynote, I really don't remember his name, I'm sorry. Then he had a note that there are things which have to be done by companies, and I think running this kind of servers is just that there is no way how to make it for free. And if we want to make it for free, then probably what is most important is some kind of interfaces and this kind of stuff between servers and applications.
Yeah, so I think companies have to be involved, but I think the cost problems are solvable. I mean, imagine 2 scenarios. Scenario 1 is that we make something, it turns out to be compelling, lots of users are interested in it. There's going to be a zillion revenue models, add-on things, ways that different people can make money off of it. And eventually that should be able to go into supporting actually doing the thing. Now, if we don't make something that's compelling, then there won't be a lot of users and we'll only need 1 server. So, you know, there might be, you know, there's an uncomfortable intermediate stage that actually like almost every startup goes through, where you don't quite have the money yet, but you need more servers. But I think it is a potentially a tractable problem.
Okay, we're running a bit short of time, so we've got one question up there and one more here, and then we can, and Jeff, because he's going to kill me otherwise, and then can save everything else and corner these guys at the party later tonight. So, up there.
Yeah, I see that the Afuro GPL version 3 is still being drafted, and I think that I'd like to urge everybody to look at that very carefully. I think that wide adoption of the Afuro GPL is going to be really important for making sure that community control is kept with these kinds of server-side technologies.
Right, and we actually experimented, you know, on the current server, we own all the copyright. So we could change the license and may well do so, but right now it's the OSL, I think, that has a similar Afuro GPL type effect. So I've been experimenting with that.
With the old Microsoft model, once you agree that your applications are controlled by Microsoft, at least your data is your own data. With the new model, you can have open source, you can have applications which belong to you, but your data doesn't belong to you anymore. Someone else has control over you. So you effectively, the model of slavery changed from application slavery to the data slavery. Don't you think it's ethically? Thank
well,
you.
no. So I remember I briefly talked about the idea of an open service definition, and how the open source definition has nothing to say about that. And I can use open source software to create that situation. But an open service definition might say something like, all the data on the server has to be available like in an open format where I can download it and stuff it in another server, this type of thing. Oh, access to it. You can't export it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, what I'm saying is, I mean, we just have to deal with that, right? Like, I think there might be new things on top of the open source definition that are requirements. And, you know, but just saying, well, we're just going to ignore people using online services, that doesn't really keep our freedom, right? And it's one of my big criticisms of GPL v3. I blogged about it a couple years ago.
It's not an all or nothing thing.
Yeah.
What you're presenting is like all the data gets off the desktop, and that is kind of all.
There's this.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
There's this mind-boggling fixation on Google and all this kind of stuff amongst everyone listening to this idea, and I think there's been a few comments here and there that people are getting the other side. At no point do you have to have Google on your Mugshot roster at all. You can have a generic GData server that uses the same API. It might be an Atom publishing protocol server or something like that you host on your server or is hosted on the GNOME servers. And this is actually the key to the liberation of online services. And if that means that open source can step up and we can start writing really rad services, like, you know, we have WordPress. I run my own WordPress, but then we also have blogs.gnome.org. Either of those things can be integrated into this.
And WordPress.com, right?
And WordPress.com. And that's this kind of thing is the key to liberating those services along the way while being relevant. And as Havoc was finishing up the presentation, he said, you know, if we as a community have the NADs to do it, then, you know, we can seriously kick ass. And I think, yes, the GNOME Foundation definitely has the NADs to get behind this.
Yeah. I mean, I just ask you to think about, would you rather have GNOME Online Desktop, your choice of your servers, any hosted server you want to use, or would you rather have Microsoft with live services versus like whatever Google does hooked to Google services? And those are your two choices, right?